This happened 20 years ago when I was still a college student. I found a part-time job at a convenience store near my place to earn some living expenses. After working there for more than 2 weeks, I finally overcame the nervousness of dealing with customers. I got the hang of the job, and I got along well with the manager and my colleagues. However, one day, around 3 a.m., when there were no customers in the store, my colleague on duty, an experienced worker who had been at the convenience store for several years and was also studying at the same university as me, was in the office reading manga. At that moment, I was alone in the storage room behind the refrigerator, replenishing drinks. After slowly placing the drinks in the refrigerator, I could take a short break once I finished replenishing the one at the farthest end. As I bent down to grab a drink from the box, suddenly I felt someone staring at me. I immediately looked around, but didn't see anything unusual. I thought it might be my imagination, but as I placed the drinks into the refrigerator, I glanced through the gap in the drink shelves and saw eyes staring at me. The person had a pale complexion, and most of their face was covered by long hair. I was startled and naturally shouted loudly, then fell to the ground. My colleague, upon hearing my scream, rushed in and asked what happened. I explained to him what had just occurred. After hearing my story, my colleague comforted me, saying it was just a minor incident and that I would get used to it over time. I wondered, get used to it? What on earth was that? Would I see it frequently in the future? Until the end of that day, I remained in a fearful and uneasy state. The terrifying image would occasionally flash in my mind. When I clocked out in the morning and handed over to the manager who was coming in for the next shift, I told him about the incident at dawn. The manager immediately advised me not to tell other new employees about it and gave me $100 as compensation for keeping quiet. One day, while working, I asked my colleague about the woman. He only warned me to keep it a secret and not tell the new hires. He assured me that the woman wouldn't harm us, she just enjoyed watching. Until I left the job, I never figured out what that woman was, only knowing that she wasn't human. During my years working at that store, I had countless staring contests with that woman. Initially, it was frightening, but as my colleague said, you get used to it. After becoming accustomed to it, sometimes, when the woman suddenly appeared and startled me, I would glare back, and she would disappear in the blink of an eye. During this time, a few new employees came and left shortly after being scared by her. By the way, the woman's eyes were bloodshot, and her eyeballs were mostly red. Now, recalling that image, I find it quite disturbing. I worked at a convenience store for about a few months before encountering something strange. Our store operated in pairs until 1 a.m., and then it became a solo shift from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. One night, a colleague who was supposed to finish at 1 a.m. suddenly asked me, "Can I stay in the store until dawn tonight?" I replied, "Of course, but there's no special reason for overtime today since it's not particularly busy." I asked him why he wanted to stay until morning, considering his home was only about a 5-minute walk away. Maybe he lost his keys? When I asked this, he smiled and said, "It's not for work. I've already clocked out, I just want to stay in the office." Our store had a small office next to the cash register, behind the door. Inside, there was a computer desk, a changing room, and shelves for storing goods. It was cramped but could barely accommodate 2 people. He mentioned he wanted to stay there for another 3 or 4 hours, which puzzled me. So, I curiously asked, "Your home is quite close, right? Just a 5-minute walk. Did you lose your keys?" With a wry smile, he replied, "I have something I want to confirm." According to him, during night shifts, he would sometimes hear someone entering the store when he was in the office, despite seeing no one when he came out. The bell that signaled a customer's entry occasionally rang due to wind or vibrations, but sometimes someone came in, and the bell didn't ring. One night during his shift, he heard someone outside calling, "Excuse me, is anyone there?" Since he was sitting at the desk near the door, he immediately went out, but the store was empty. Another night, he heard the call again, checked the CCTV screen, but saw no one inside or outside. Frustrated, he told me these incidents occurred once or twice a week. He asked if I had similar experiences, and though I worked night shifts about twice a week too, I couldn't recall anything like that. So, I shook my head, and he sighed, saying, "I see. Anyway, I'll leave it to you today." After 2 hours, it was 3 a.m. The store was almost empty that night, and with my colleague's help, work finished quickly. As we chatted in the office, just when I almost forgot why my colleague stayed, an apologetic call came from outside the door. Remembering what he told me, I glanced at him. He immediately checked the CCTV and then shook his head, signaling that there was no one outside. Despite feeling a bit anxious, I had to check. As I reached for the door, my colleague suddenly shouted, "Wait." Pointing at a spot on the screen, he said, "Look here." He pointed to the interior of the cash register, and we saw a pair of woman's feet and what looked like hair, similar to the woman's, near the blind spot of the office door on the CCTV. It seemed she was pressed against the wall, and her long hair covered the part above her knees, only capturing a partial view due to the camera angle. I dared not move or turn around since the door behind me had a square window. Although the window was likely opaque from the other side, I felt the woman outside was watching us. Soon after, my colleague said she disappeared, and the CCTV showed no one. Terrified, I pleaded with my colleague to stay until my shift ended that day. In the following weeks, despite being frightened, I didn't experience anything similar. The woman was not seen on the CCTV either. After a month, my colleague abruptly resigned. I asked the store manager why, and he told me that after we both saw the woman, my colleague confirmed how to adjust the CCTV. Shortly after, he resigned. The manager wasn't sure what happened, but he didn't think my colleague did anything wrong. Curious about what my colleague saw, I asked the manager about adjusting the CCTV. One day, when I was alone at work, I reviewed the footage. After watching, I understood why my colleague resigned. It was footage captured the day before he stayed with me. When he worked alone during a night shift, the woman appeared standing in front of the office door. No one was inside the store, but in response to the call, my colleague came out. As he opened the office door and walked out, he passed directly through the woman. I believe my colleague saw this scene, prompting his resignation. Later, I casually asked the manager and other colleagues if they had experienced anything strange, but the answers were all negative. What was the deal with that woman? Since my colleague left, there haven't been any more strange occurrences in the store. However, because I was frightened after watching those videos, I resigned shortly after. Even now, I still wonder if that woman followed my colleague or if she's still standing there.